Coming up on AVANT Technology Insights with Ken Presti.
They have certainly become more active, and I hate to say it, but I think we have to view it as stepping up their game.
Coronavirus and COVID 19 have dominated technology news in recent weeks, mostly talking about the finer points of facilitating remote work at a time when offices are closed and people are effectively confined to quarters. Meanwhile, the bad guys have stepped up their game, as you just heard, leveraging fear around the pandemic to incite people to make mistakes. We're taking a different angle on this today, talking to a prominent cybersecurity attorney on the legal implications and what your company can do to protect itself in the wake of an attack, as well as before. Welcome to Avant Technology Insights. I'm your host, Ken Presti. The link between solving business challenges and cutting-edge technologies has become tighter and more complex than ever before. In this podcast series from Avant Research and Analytics, we help enterprise decision makers sort through the business case, the value, the challenges, and ultimately the bottom line of technology adoption. So listen to us at your desktop, take us in the car, tune in from the commuter train, or download us at the gate. You'll find us on Apple, Spotify, and Google, as well as in more than 25 countries listening to us right now and available across the globe. So, Shawn Tuma, thank you very much for making time for the show here today. We've got a lot of ground to cover in terms of IT security and what all this means from a legal standpoint. We've heard a lot about what your background is. Given what's going on in the world these days with coronavirus and all the lockdowns and things like that, I'm guessing that the bad guys have either stepped up their game or stepped down their game. And from a legal perspective, based on what you're hearing from, basically your clients across the board, which direction do you see them heading at this point?
They have certainly become more active, and I hate to say it, but I think we have to view it as stepping up their game, even though folks like us would not view that as a upward or a positive thing. They have become much more active. These hackers, um, they are opportunistic. um, and they use anything they can find to their advantage, anything that's happening. And it's unfortunate that even a world global crisis like we're dealing with right now, we're seeing them use this as an opportunity to, one, attack people through the weaknesses of working from home, and then two, so much of this hacking activity is really social engineering, mainly through phishing emails. And they're now using this coronavirus pandemic as a way of getting people to let their guards down and fall for a lot of these phishing emails. And it's tragic that that's what we have to deal with.
What sort of tactics are you seeing in particular these days that you weren't seeing a month or 6 weeks ago?
The most is the phishing emails. The emails coming in under the guise of being, um, coronavirus information sharing. So, something like click here to get the latest info on coronavirus statistics, or something like how to know if you've been infected or if your symptoms and how to treat them. We're seeing that. We're seeing make believe charities. So, something like this is a relief fund being set up. Click here to learn more. When in fact they're anything but that. It's criminals using that as a pretext to get people to click on those links to then hopefully get more of their information.
Are you seeing this mostly at the consumer level, or are you seeing this happening to businesses as well?
Both. We tend to learn more about the business side because we represent businesses primarily. But I am also, in other information sharing groups where it is definitely happening at least as much, if not exponentially more, at the consumer level of trying to get, you know, just normal everyday citizens to fall for these scams.
Give me a sense of what are the typical types of IT security issues that are likely to end up on your desk?
The most common would be cyber incident response, what we typically refer to as breach response, though I am much more careful in how I use the words data breach than most people probably are, because to me there is a huge difference between an incident and a breach. And it's actually a legal definition, but it can be anything. Right now, what we're seeing so much of is ransomware cases where companies are being hit with these ransomware attacks, um, or hospitals, medical providers, um, those situations end up on our desk. Managed services providers are getting hit with ransomware, and it's being used to attack their customers. We got a new case in on Monday where an MSP got hit, and we're representing three of their customers and trying to get them restored. So we see a lot of that. Um, you know, your typical attack, your payment card type attacks, where hackers go after a company and they exfiltrate their payment card data through the point of sale system or however. We see a significant number of those, and then a lot of it is just intrusions into a network where something happened, somebody got in and they were doing something, but you really don't know what it is. And so we will move the investigation forward and see, through the use of a forensics provider, whether data was accessed, whether it was exfiltrated, and then all based upon that information, we have to determine what are the legal and regulatory obligations, because now all 50 states have data breach notification laws. Many states now have data security or cybersecurity laws that prescribe how companies are required to protect their networks and data. And then, the other thing we have that's really opening the door on a lot of this are things like the California Consumer Privacy Act, which is kind of pigtailed or piggybacked along on the GDPR here of 2018. So, what we're really, Ken, to summarize it all, um, you know, when there is a cyber event, an adverse cyber event or an incident, it there's a lot of obligations that get triggered in that many times. Um, and that's what we're here to guide through. And so, the one place people don't think about are their contracts, because so many contracts now have all of these cyber and privacy protection obligations, and so that gives rise to a lot of this as well.
So let's say I'm a technologist and I come to the realization that something has happened. It could be a breach, it could be ransomware, what have you. So I deal with that at the technical level, at the technological level. I either eliminate that breach or I at least contain it. Now, what happens next from a legal perspective? I'm used to thinking of things in terms of how they impact us technically, but once we get to that point, now what happens from a legal perspective?
Well, in reality, what should have happened before you, and look, there's priorities, right? The priority is always to get your organization either secured or back up and running, because that's how you do business. And if you can't do business, none of this other stuff really matters that much. But in an ideal world, whenever you see that you've had some sort of a technology adverse event, that would be the time to, number one, retain your attorney, because we can then lead your investigation into that and your remediation, and if set up properly, at least have a solid argument for protecting those processes under the attorney-client privilege. It's not a guarantee, but it at least gives you that argument. And then number two, what other many people do not realize is, now so many companies have and should have cyber insurance, and those cyber insurance policies will if it's a good policy, if it's an appropriate one for your organization and your risk, will cover the cost of a lot of those steps that are taken through the technology process, like bringing in outside vendors, bringing in a forensics firm, legal fees, all that stuff. But in many cases, in most cases, you need to give them immediate or very quick notice of that event, and you need to get their approval to make sure that those vendors that you are working with, that they're approved under that policy, or else they probably won't be covered.
Okay, let's go back to what you said a moment ago about leading that investigation. And I think you may have answered part of it just a moment ago in the continuation of your remarks. But in a situation where something happens and a law firm is brought in to lead the investigation or at least participate in it to a significant degree, what are some of the things that you think are likely to be brought to the table by that law firm that most other people who perhaps don't have that level of legal expertise are likely to forget or ignore?
Well, one thing is just the general experience that we have over the years. For example, I mean, I've got into cyber law in 1999. I've participated in now thousands of investigations or responses, along with my team. And so there are a lot of somewhat simple things sometimes that we know that cause problems that a lot of technology people don't. For example, if you have a ransomware attack, a lot of your IT professionals see the first step as, do we have backups? If you don't have backups, they want to start rebuilding the network. And so they wipe the drives and then they start rebuilding. What we know as attorneys is we need the data that's on that drive. We need it to be preserved because a ransomware case is now a legal issue, because many times ransomware is coupled with exfiltration of data. And so we need to be able to perform forensics on that data to determine, was there truly exfiltration? If not, if you're in a healthcare context, that is presumed to be a data breach, and you now have to jump into your data breach notification process. If we can perform forensics and show that there was no exfiltration of data, and then you're able to recover your network, then we can avoid that whole breach notification process. So that's something we as attorneys know. What we also know is many of these insurance policies now have provisions that'll cover the payment of the ransomware extortion amount to get you back up and running. But when the IT provider comes in and immediately wipes those drives, they've now essentially killed the patient sitting on the operating table, because the insurance company would have paid to have it decrypted, but now there's nothing to decrypt because it's all gone. So those are the kind of warnings we'll give. We will make sure we're working with people who have substantial experience in whatever it is we're dealing with. And we'll advise on communications. We'll advise on how to handle it internally with a working group, and keeping that information within the groups that it needs to be. Will help with working with employees and others who may have learned from this, boards of directors, business partners. All of those are the kind of things that need legal advice.
So, when all this happens, aside from calling a firm like yours, who should I call? Who should I notify right off the bat? Do I bring in law enforcement? And if so, at what level?
We have very strong relationships with law enforcement. I am a huge advocate of working with law enforcement, and I have never had an adverse situation working with them. They're not always there. I mean, what I mean is they're overwhelmed. They're handling really big things, keeping our nation safe. So if it's some little small matter and you're expecting the FBI to come jump on it, they're not going to. They don't have the resources, so don't expect that. But my two go-to agencies are the FBI and the Secret Service. So most cyber events, most incidents or attacks, we would report that to the FBI through personal contacts that we have. If it's something involving wiring of money, like a business email compromise or something of that nature, or one of these, these invoice fraud scams, type things, that usually is best to go to the Secret Service because they have a direct line in with these banks. And if you can get them the information in a short enough time frame, they can often trap that money. The FBI can do it as well, but they each have their sweet spots, and that's really the Secret Service's sweet spot.
The Secret Service, as I recall, is part of the Treasury Department, right?
I believe so. And
Okay.
they financial crimes like that are really um, where we've typically gone. When we need to get a bank involved, or those kind of banking accounts to stop money, we've had great success with the Secret Service when we can get them the information quickly enough.
So, in terms of looking at this like I would any other security breach, we get trained to prepare for a security breach or, any kind of an attack before it happens. When is the right time to put a plan in place? And I'm thinking of this particularly from the context of a larger enterprise company. When is the right time for them to put a plan in place that not only includes what they're going to do from a technical perspective, but what they're going to do from a legal perspective? Does this happen early on? Does this happen after the incident? And what does that look like?
Ken, it should happen as soon as possible and well before the incident. One of the analogies that I like to use is it's like a sports team. To prepare for your game, you got to practice like you're going to play. And so you need more people involved in that incident response process than just your technical team. Cyber and data breach. This is a business risk issue. It's not just a technical issue anymore. It's not just it's not confined to any one part of the organization. It impacts the whole business. So when you're planning on how you're going to handle this, you need all of those players involved. And a big part of who you need involved is your outside counsel. So you need to have them retained in advance because they should be a part of that incident response tabletop exercise that you should be doing. And so, in an ideal world, you would put your incident response plan together. Um, then you would train the people who are part of that response plan on what their roles are. So they understand I am a part of this. Here's how I'm going to fit within this plan. Here's how I do my job. And then you do your tabletop exercises where you actually put them in that scenario and treat it as much like a real world incident as possible. Now, part of that is you have to know who your players are going to be. And I mentioned earlier about cyber insurance and approved vendors. What we see cause many problems now and the loss in time of doing the work we need to do is companies have cyber insurance and they should. Everybody should have cyber insurance these days, but they don't know what it says. And what they don't know is a vast majority of these policies say you have to work with certain vendors who are on our approved list. And if you don't know who those vendors are, then when you're putting your incident response plan together and you're saying, hey, here's our primary law firm that we use. We've worked with them for 40 years. This is who we're going to call. You don't know if they're approved or not. Here's a great cyber forensics firm we've worked with. We know them. This is who we want. Here's a forensics accounting firm. Here's a PR firm that we've worked with in the past or that we currently work with. People are writing those companies into their plans and they're not approved vendors. And so then when they have a problem and they should be executing that plan, they're instead having to deal with trying to get them now approved under the insurance policy or trying to now start relationships with new companies who are approved that they have no history with. And so they're losing all this critical time there when they could have either gotten a policy that their people were on and already approved by, or they could have gotten their preferred vendors pre-approved under those policies before the time when they needed them. And so that's a critical part of that incident response planning process that people aren't thinking about. And something that simple is costing them days of valuable time.
What do you see as some of the other common stumbling blocks or mistakes made with respect to cyber insurance?
Not getting the right policy and not getting enough coverage are two big ones. So one example is, if you're a company that is not doing a lot of business consumer facing work, so you're B2C,
Hmm.
your privacy breach notification expenses might not be terribly high, right? Because you're not going to have a million individuals whose personal data you've collected and are holding. But your obligations to your business partners may be substantial. Some policies exclude contractual liability. So if you and another business have a privacy addendum attached to your master services agreement, and it says you will indemnify us for any losses that are caused because of you know your failures on your part, you will pay for all breach notification expenses, all this stuff, um, and you have a contract that requires that, but then you have an insurance policy that excludes contractual liability. That policy may do absolutely no good for you in the event you have an incident that triggers a problem with your business partner now on a B2B level, and you need that coverage to come kick in to pay for the data breach that you've caused to them. And then your carrier comes back and says, no, you have this exclusion right here. You don't have the right coverage. A lot of them have social engineering exclusions. As we well know, most cyber attacks start with a phishing email,
Yeah, I was
something
going to
like that.
say if you've got a phishing exclusion or a social engineering exclusion, that's going to wipe out a huge value of that contract. I would think.
That's
I
right.
mean,
Yeah,
it sounds like so much of this is about taking a look at the policy when it's on the table, looking at all the other agreements that you have in place, and you kind of have to play a little bit of a Rubik's cube with it to make sure that everything stacks up so that when something happens, you're ready to go.
that's right, Ken. At the end of the day, what we're all trying to do here is we're trying to manage risk. Cyber is a risk like any other risk, and we're not going to eliminate it. We can't eliminate it. But the way to manage that risk is we have to understand our risks. So that means we have to understand our own business. We have to understand where the major risks are within how we do business as a unique company. And then we need someone, a good qualified broker who can go out, understand the cyber policies and the cyber risks well enough to then get the right kind of policy to match up with what your business needs. And that's really where I see a lot of weaknesses. People everybody's happy to sell cyber now, but not everybody truly understands those policies. And so you need someone who really gets it to help you get the right policy.
Okay, Shawn Tuma, cybersecurity attorney for the law firm of Spencer Fain. Thank you so much for taking time out today. I don't know about anybody else, but I certainly learned a lot on this, and I appreciate your taking time out.
Well, thank you so much, Ken. It's been a pleasure.
You've been listening to Avant Technology Insights with Ken Presti, featuring information and opinions on how key technologies can be leveraged to solve business problems. Avant Technology Insights is a service of Avant Communications, an IT decision-making platform for next-generation technologies. All opinions expressed are those of the guests and the host. For more information, please visit www.goavant.net. That's www.goav as in victory, ant.net. For Avant Research and Analytics, this is Ken Presti.